The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. Marcus Cole took his first step onto Axiom Prime and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. The air smelled different here. It was clean and cold, with a strange sweetness that tickled his nose. Above him, two suns hung in a purple sky, casting double shadows on the polished metal ground. He was the first human to ever stand on this world, the first human to ever be accepted into the Galactic Defense Academy. Back on Earth, people called him a hero. Here on this alien planet, he was something else entirely. He was a joke. Marcus walked down the landing platform with his bag over his shoulder. His uniform was new and stiff. The fabric was designed for dozens of different species, so it fit him poorly. Too loose in some places, too tight in others. He tried not to think about how ridiculous he must look. The academy rose before him like a mountain of glass and light. Towers stretched toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float on nothing. Ships flew between the buildings like metal birds. Everything was huge. Everything was designed for beings much larger than him. A group of cadets stood near the entrance, watching him approach. Marcus recognized some of the species from his studies. The tall ones, with blue skin and 4 eyes, were Velthari. They were warriors born and raised for combat. The shortest one among them was still 2 heads taller than Marcus. Next to them stood a Drexian. His scales were dark green, and his yellow eyes tracked Marcus like a predator watching prey. His mouth was full of teeth that could bite through steel. There were others too. Crystalline beings that seemed to be made of living glass. Insectoid creatures with too many legs. A floating sphere of energy that hummed with electricity. All of them were looking at Marcus. None of them were smiling. "So this is the human," said one of the Velthari. His voice was deep and rumbling, like thunder in the distance. "I expected something more." The others laughed. It was not a friendly sound. Marcus said nothing. He simply nodded politely and walked past them toward the main entrance. He could feel their eyes on his back. He could hear their whispers. Let them talk, he thought. Words could not hurt him. Inside the academy, things were not much better. The halls were crowded with cadets from across the galaxy. Some of them stopped to stare at Marcus as he passed. Others pretended not to see him at all, which was somehow worse. He found his way to the registration office, where a bored-looking official scanned his documents. The official was a Keth, an insectoid species with large compound eyes and clicking mandibles. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Human," she said. "Room 7749, 7th tower, 7th floor. Your dorm mate is already there." Marcus thanked her and left. It took him almost an hour to find his room. The academy was like a maze, and the signs were written in a dozen different languages. None of them were English. His translator implant helped, but it was not perfect. Some words simply did not translate. When he finally reached room 7749, he found the door already open. Inside, a massive Drexian was unpacking his belongings. He was even bigger than the one Marcus had seen outside. His shoulders were so wide that he had to turn sideways to fit through the doorway. The Drexian looked up as Marcus entered. His yellow eyes went wide with surprise, then narrow with something like disgust. "You," he said. "You are my dorm mate?" "I am," Marcus replied. "My name is Marcus Cole." The Drexian snorted. "I am Kothar. I requested a Velthari roommate, or at least a Torvan. Instead, they give me a human." He shook his massive head. "No offense, little one, but your species is not built for this place. I give you 40 days before you quit." Marcus set his bag on the empty bed. It was too big for him, designed for someone twice his size. "I appreciate your honesty," he said calmly, "but I do not plan to quit." Kothar laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "They all say that. The weak ones always say that. Then the training begins and they learn the truth about themselves." He pointed one clawed finger at Marcus. "You are small. You are soft. You have no claws, no scales, no venom. Your eyes cannot see in the dark. Your ears cannot hear high sounds. You will fail, human. It is simply a matter of time." Marcus did not argue. There was no point. Instead, he began to unpack his own belongings. A few sets of clothes, some books on alien cultures, a small photograph of his family back on Earth. He placed the photo on his bedside table, where he could see it when he woke up each morning. The next day, training began. Instructor Velshar was a Torvan, a species with 4 arms and skin like leather. She stood before the assembled cadets with her arms crossed, all 4 of them, and looked at them with cold, measuring eyes. "Welcome to the Academy," she said. Her voice was sharp and clear. "You have been chosen from billions of candidates across 12 species. You are supposed to be the best your worlds have to offer." Her gaze found Marcus in the crowd. "Some of you I am not so sure about." The other cadets laughed. Marcus kept his face still. "Humans," Velshar continued, "live barely 100 years. They cannot see ultraviolet light. They cannot breathe methane. They cannot regrow lost limbs. They are, by galactic standards, one of the weakest intelligent species ever discovered." She paused. "And yet, the Concord of 12 has granted them a seat at this academy. One seat. One chance to prove themselves." She looked directly at Marcus now. "Do not waste it." The first test was simple. A race around the training ground. Marcus finished last, far behind everyone else. The Velthari cadets lapped him twice. Even the slowest species beat him by several minutes. When he crossed the finish line, gasping for breath, Kuthar was waiting for him. 39 days, the Drexian said with a grin. "Maybe less." Marcus wiped the sweat from his face and said nothing, but his eyes were watching, always watching. He noted which cadets were fastest, which ones had the most endurance, which ones worked together, and which ones worked alone. He was learning. That night, while Kothar slept, Marcus stayed awake. He read about Drexian biology, about Velthari combat techniques, about every species in the academy and every world they came from. They thought he was weak. They thought he was stupid. They thought he would fail. Marcus Cole planned to prove them wrong. 3 months passed at the academy, and Marcus Cole was still there. This surprised everyone, including Kothar, who had lost count of his predictions about when the human would quit. But surviving was not the same as succeeding. Marcus placed last in almost every physical test. He was the slowest runner, the weakest lifter, the worst climber. In combat training, he was knocked down so many times that the medical staff knew him by name. "Back again, human?" the Keth nurse would say as she treated his bruises. "What was it this time? Velthari elbow? Drexian tail?" "Both," Marcus would reply, and the nurse would click her mandibles in what might have been sympathy. The other cadets found endless entertainment in his failures. In the mess hall, jokes about humans became a daily tradition, a way for species that had nothing else in common to bond together. "Why did the human bring a ladder to the academy?" a Jorth cadet asked one day. The Jorth were crystalline beings, beautiful and cold, with perfect memory and skin that sparkled like diamonds. "Because he heard the training was going to be hard." The table erupted in laughter. Marcus, sitting alone in the corner, continued eating his meal. The food was designed for many different species, so it tasted like nothing at all. He had grown used to it. "I have a better one," said Cirrus, a Velthari warrior with pale blue skin and a scar across his face. "What is the difference between a human and a piece of cargo?" "Cargo is useful." More laughter, louder this time. A few cadets glanced at Marcus to see his reaction. He gave them none. He simply finished his food, stood up, and left the hall. Behind him, he heard Kothar's rumbling voice. "I almost feel sorry for him. Almost." The mockery was constant, but Marcus did not let it touch him. He had a purpose here, and that purpose was bigger than his pride. Earth needed a place in the galactic community. Humans needed to prove they belonged among the stars. If that meant being laughed at, so be it. But Marcus was not simply enduring. He was learning. Every night, while other cadets rested or socialized, Marcus studied. He read everything he could find about the galaxy: military history, planetary geography, species biology, cultural customs. He filled notebook after notebook with observations and ideas. He watched the other cadets carefully. He noticed that the Velthari were strong but proud. They hated to look weak and would take foolish risks to appear brave. The Drexians were powerful but slow to adapt. They relied on their size and strength, rarely changing their tactics. The Jorth had perfect memory. But this made them predictable. They always did things the same way because that way had always worked. Every species had strengths. Every species had weaknesses. Marcus wrote them all down. He also studied his own species. He read about human history, human biology, human psychology. He learned about persistence hunting, an ancient technique where human ancestors would chase prey for hours, even days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. He learned about human adaptability, how his species had spread across Earth to live in deserts, jungles, frozen wastelands, and everything in between. Humans were weak compared to most galactic species, but they were also stubborn, creative, and very, very patient. In the classroom, Marcus performed differently than in physical training. His theoretical scores were nearly perfect. He understood tactics, strategy, and logistics better than cadets who had been studying warfare for decades. When instructors posed complex problems, Marcus often found solutions that no one else had considered. This confused some of his teachers. Cadet Cole, instructor Velshar, said one day after class, "Your written work is excellent. Your analysis of the Battle of Kryn was the best in your year. And yet in practical exercises, you fail constantly. Why is this?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I am learning, instructor." "Learning? Learning what?" "How to lose." Velshar's forearms shifted with impatience. "You have the mind of a commander, but you fight like a child. It makes no sense." "It will," Marcus said quietly. "Eventually." Velshar stared at him for a long moment. There was something in the human's eyes that she could not quite read. Something calm and patient and perhaps a little dangerous. But she dismissed the thought. He was just a human after all. What threat could he possibly pose? The months continued to pass. Marcus kept failing and kept learning. He asked strange questions that no one understood. He wanted to know about homeworlds, about atmospheres, about what temperatures different species could survive. He asked about food, about sleep cycles, about healing rates. "Why do you care?" Cuthar asked one night, watching Marcus read yet another biology textbook. "You are not a scientist. You are supposed to be a soldier." "A soldier should know his allies," Marcus replied, "and his enemies." "We are your allies, human. We are all cadets here." Marcus looked up from his book. "Are we?" Cuthar had no answer to that. There was one cadet who did not join in the mockery. Her name was Ilix, and she was a Girath. Unlike her crystalline brothers and sisters, who looked down on Marcus with cold amusement, Ilix watched him with something like curiosity. "You are different from what I expected," she told him one day. They were in the library, surrounded by floating screens and holographic books. "When they announced a human was joining the academy, I assumed you would be loud and angry." "Humans in the entertainment vids are always loud and angry." Marcus smiled slightly. "Entertainment vids are not very accurate." "No, they are not," Ilix tilted her head, and light sparkled across her crystalline face. "You never react to the jokes. You never fight back. Some cadets think you are too stupid to understand that you are being mocked. Others think you are too scared to respond." She paused. "I think they are both wrong." "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "I think you are waiting for something." Her eyes, like perfect diamonds, studied him closely. "I think you are playing a longer game than anyone realizes." Marcus said nothing, but for just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Something that might have been respect. "I do not know what you are planning, human," Ilix continued, "but I find myself hoping that you succeed. It would be interesting to see everyone proven wrong." She left him alone with his books. That night, Marcus added a new note to his observations. Ilix, Girath, intelligent, observant, potential ally. Do not underestimate. He would need allies for what was coming. The Academy's final test was approaching, and Marcus had been preparing for it since the day he arrived. Every insult he had ignored, every defeat he had suffered, every hour of study and observation, all of it was leading to one moment, the crucible of Axiom. And when it came, Marcus Cole would finally show the galaxy what a human could do. The announcement came on a cold morning when frost covered the windows and the twin suns hung low in the purple sky. Every cadet in the academy was called to the Great Hall, a massive chamber that could hold 10,000 beings. Today it was nearly full. Marcus stood near the back, surrounded by cadets who towered over him. He could barely see the stage at the front, where the Academy's senior instructors were gathered, but he could hear every word. "Cadets of the Galactic Defense Academy," announced the Commandant, an ancient Velthari whose blue skin had faded to gray with age. "The time has come for the ultimate test. The test that will separate true warriors from pretenders. The test that will determine who among you is worthy to serve in the Galactic Defense Force." The hall was silent. Every cadet knew what was coming. "I speak of the Crucible of Axiom," the Commandant continued. 7 days of survival on the terraformed moon of Haxus 7. You will face extreme conditions, hostile terrain, and simulated enemy combatants. You will do so alone, with only standard equipment and your own skills to rely on. There will be no help, no rescue, no mercy. Marcus felt his heart beat faster. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for. "The Crucible has a failure rate of 40%, the Commandant said. "In the past decade, 3 cadets have died during the trial. This is not a game. This is not a simulation. This is real and it is dangerous." His old eyes swept across the crowd. "If you are afraid, if you are unprepared, if you know in your heart that you are not ready, I encourage you to withdraw now. There is no shame in knowing your limits." No one moved, no one spoke. "Very well. The Crucible begins in 10 days. Prepare yourselves." The hall exploded into noise as soon as the Commandant left the stage. Cadets discussed the trial in excited voices. Some boasted about how easily they would complete it. Others worried quietly about the dangers ahead. And everywhere Marcus heard his own name. "The human will never survive," said a Velthari cadet loudly. "He can barely finish a morning run. How will he last 7 days in the wild?" "I heard the volcanic region has temperatures that would cook a human alive," added another. "And the toxic jungle has air that would melt his lungs." "Maybe he will be smart enough to quit before it starts," someone else said. For once, the human would be making a good decision. Marcus ignored them all. He was already thinking about the trial ahead, planning his approach, considering his options. He had studied Haxus 7 extensively. He knew its terrain, its climate, its dangers. He knew things that most cadets had never bothered to learn. In the barracks that night, the betting began. 50 credits says the human triggers emergency extraction on the first day, Cirrus announced loudly. He was sitting on his bed surrounded by a group of admiring Velthari cadets. Before the first sun set, "Who wants to take that bet?" "Too easy," Kothar replied. He was sharpening his claws, a nightly ritual that always made Marcus uncomfortable. "I say he lasts 2 days. He is stubborn, I will give him that. But 2 days is his limit." "1 day," said another cadet. "Half a day," said another. The numbers got smaller and smaller. Soon cadets were betting on how many hours the human would survive. The record was 4 hours, offered by a Keth cadet who seemed to find the whole thing very amusing. Then a quiet voice spoke up. "I bet he survives all 7 days." Everyone turned to look. It was Ilex, the giraffe female, who rarely spoke and never joined in the mockery. She stood in the doorway, her crystalline body catching the light from the hallway. Cirrus laughed. 7 days, the human? You must be joking." "I never joke about bets," Ilex replied calmly. 100 credits. He survives the entire trial." The barracks went silent. 100 credits was a lot of money, even for cadets from wealthy families. It was more than most of them received in a month. "You would throw away your money on a human?" Kothar asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why?" Ilex looked at Marcus, who had been watching the scene without expression. "Because I have learned never to underestimate someone who refuses to quit." She turned and left. The barracks remained quiet for a moment, then erupted into louder laughter than before. "She has lost her mind," Cirrus declared. 100 credits gone. The human should thank her before he fails." Marcus said nothing. But that night, after the lights went out and the other cadets fell asleep, he allowed himself a small smile. The next 10 days were busy ones. While other cadets focused on physical training, pushing their bodies to peak condition, Marcus took a different approach. He spent hours in the Academy archives, reading everything he could find about Haxus 7. He studied weather patterns, geological surveys, biological reports on local wildlife. He memorized maps and analyzed terrain. He also made some unusual requests. "You want what?" the supply officer asked, staring at Marcus with confusion. The officer was a Torvan, like Instructor Velshar, with 4 arms that were currently crossed in suspicion. "Medical supplies," Marcus repeated. "Extra bandages, antiseptic, pain medication. Also, water purification tablets, thermal blankets, and fire-starting equipment." "These are all standard issue for the Crucible," the officer said. "I know. I want more." The officer frowned. "Most cadets request weapons, combat gear, things that will help them fight." "I do not plan to fight," Marcus replied. "I plan to survive." He was allowed the extra supplies, though the officer clearly thought he was wasting his time. Marcus did not care what the officer thought. He packed everything carefully into his kit, checking and rechecking each item. On the morning of the trial, cadets gathered at the shuttle bay, 200 of them from 12 different species, all waiting to be transported to Haxis 7. The mood was tense. Some cadets were eager, ready to prove themselves. Others were nervous, hiding their fear behind forced confidence. Marcus stood alone as usual. His pack was heavier than most, filled with supplies that others had dismissed as unnecessary. He wore his uniform properly and held his head high. If this was going to be his moment, he would face it with dignity. Kuthar approached him just before boarding. "Human," the Drexian said. His voice was different than usual, not mocking but almost serious. "I want you to know that I do not expect you to succeed, but I hope you survive. Dying would be a waste, even for a human." Marcus looked up at his doormate. "Thank you, Kothar. That is the kindest thing you have ever said to me." Kothar snorted. "Do not get used to it." They boarded their separate shuttles. Each cadet would be dropped at a random location on Haxis 7, alone, with only their equipment and their skills. As his shuttle rose into the sky, Marcus looked down at the academy growing smaller below. He thought about all the months of mockery, all the jokes, all the predictions of his failure. He thought about Ilix's bet and Kothar's grudging respect. He thought about Earth, so far away, waiting to hear what their first cadet would accomplish. The shuttle entered hyperspace. The Crucible was about to begin. The shuttle dropped Marcus into hell. He landed in the volcanic region of Haxis 7, the harshest starting zone on the entire moon. The ground beneath his feet was black rock, still warm from the lava that had flowed here centuries ago. The air was thick with ash and smelled of sulfur. In the distance, mountains of fire glowed red against the dark sky. Most cadets would have panicked. The volcanic region was considered a death sentence for species that could not handle extreme heat. The Drexians would struggle here. The Urath would crack. Even the mighty Velthari would find the conditions difficult. But Marcus had prepared for this. He took a moment to study his surroundings. The terrain was rough but passable. There were caves in the distance that would provide shelter. A dried riverbed suggested water might be found if he dug deep enough. The air was bad but breathable. He would survive. He started walking. Back at the academy, instructors watched the trial unfold through hidden cameras and biosensor feeds. They tracked every cadet, monitoring their progress and their health. The control room was busy with activity as 200 data streams flowed across the screens. "How long before the human activates his emergency beacon?" one instructor asked. He was watching Marcus struggle through the volcanic wasteland, sweat pouring down his face. "Give him an hour," another replied. "The heat alone will defeat him." But 1 hour passed, then 2, then 5. Marcus did not stop. He did not call for help. He kept walking, kept moving, kept surviving. Instructor Velshar watched his progress with growing confusion. "What is he doing?" she muttered. The human had found a cave and was setting up a crude camp. He had stripped off part of his uniform and was using it to fan himself. More importantly, his body was doing something strange. Liquid was pouring from his skin, soaking his clothes, dripping onto the ground. "Is he leaking?" asked another instructor with alarm. "No," Velshar said slowly, remembering something from human biology class. "He is sweating. Humans release water through their skin to cool themselves. It is their natural cooling system." She leaned closer to the screen. "I had forgotten they could do that." On Haxus 7, Marcus survived his first night in the volcanic region. He slept in short periods, waking often to check his surroundings. The temperature dropped slightly after dark, which helped. By morning, he was tired but alive. Day 2 brought new challenges. He had to cross the volcanic zone to reach the next region. The path was dangerous, filled with unstable ground and pockets of toxic gas. Marcus moved slowly and carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down. Other cadets might have rushed through, trusting their superior speed and strength. Marcus trusted patience. At the academy, the first withdrawals began. A Keth cadet triggered her emergency beacon after falling into a hidden crevice. A Jorith male activated his after the toxic jungle air started affecting his crystalline body. By the end of day 2, 15 cadets had already quit. Marcus was still going. Day 3 was the desert. Endless sand, burning sun, no shade anywhere. Most species hated this region. The Drexians, with their cold blood, became sluggish without warmth, but baked under direct sunlight. The Velthari lost water quickly through their large bodies. Marcus wrapped his head in cloth to block the sun. He traveled at night when it was cooler, sleeping during the hottest hours in shallow holes he dug in the sand. He rationed his water carefully, taking small sips instead of large gulps. These were old techniques used by humans on Earth for thousands of years. They still worked. On day 4, he reached the toxic jungle. The air here was filled with chemicals that would damage most lungs. Special breathing equipment was recommended, but not provided. Cadets had to make do with what they had. Marcus had prepared for this. He took materials from his kit and from the jungle itself, combining them into a crude filter that he tied over his mouth and nose. It was not perfect, but it was enough. He breathed slowly and carefully, keeping his movements calm to avoid taking in too much bad air. The instructors were now watching him constantly. "Where did he learn to do that?" one of them asked as Marcus navigated through the toxic jungle without any major problems. "I do not know," Velshar admitted, "but he came more prepared than anyone expected." By day 5, the leaderboard at the academy showed surprising results. Of the original 200 cadets, only 103 remained active. Many of the strongest, fastest cadets had already withdrawn. The Crucible did not care about strength or speed. It cared about survival, and Marcus Cole was still surviving. That night, a massive storm system formed over the northern quadrant of Haxus 7. Emergency protocols suggested extraction for any cadets in its path. The storm would bring freezing temperatures, high winds, and dangerous lightning. It was considered too risky for most species. 12 cadets were in the danger zone. 11 of them activated their emergency beacons. Marcus did not. Instead, he found a rock formation that would block the wind. He wrapped himself in every thermal layer he had, creating a cocoon of warmth around his body. Then he wedged himself into a crack in the rocks, protected from above and below. The storm hit like a hammer. Winds screamed across the landscape. Snow and ice fell from the sky. The temperature dropped to levels that would kill most beings in minutes. Marcus closed his eyes and slept. "He is insane," Cawthor said in the viewing room at the academy. He had withdrawn on day 4 after the desert damaged his scales. Now he watched the human with something like awe. "He is sleeping through a storm that would kill a Velthari." "No," Ilix said softly. She was still in the trial, currently resting in the temperate zone, but her crystalline body allowed her to monitor multiple feeds at once. "He is not insane. He is stubborn. There is a difference." On day 6, the storm passed. Marcus emerged from his shelter cold and stiff, but alive. His fingers were blue and his face was damaged by the freezing wind. But he was alive. He continued walking. That afternoon, he found something unexpected. An emergency beacon, lying in a frozen ravine. Next to it, half buried in snow, was a massive body covered in green scales. Cawthor. Marcus slid down into the ravine. His dorm mate was alive but barely. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow. The cold was killing him slowly. His beacon had been damaged in the fall, unable to send a signal. Protocol said to continue. Resources were limited. Every hour Marcus spent here was an hour he was not completing the trial. And Kothar had spent months mocking him, predicting his failure, calling him weak. Marcus looked at the broken Drexian, then he opened his medical kit and got to work. Marcus worked quickly in the frozen ravine. Kothar's leg was badly broken, the bone pushing against the scales from inside. The Drexian was unconscious, which was probably a mercy. What Marcus had to do next would hurt. He had studied field medicine on Earth before coming to the academy. Humans had been fixing broken bones for thousands of years. The techniques were simple but effective. Marcus found two straight branches and used strips from his own clothing to create a splint. He straightened the leg as best he could, ignoring the grinding sound it made. Then he wrapped it tightly, keeping the bone in place. Kothar groaned but did not wake. The next problem was temperature. Drexians were cold-blooded. Without external heat, Kothar would continue to freeze. Marcus built a small fire using his emergency supplies, positioning his dorm mate close enough to feel the warmth. The green scales slowly changed color as blood began to flow properly again. It took 3 hours before Kothar opened his eyes. What? Where? The Drexian looked around in confusion, then saw Marcus sitting beside him. His yellow eyes went wide. Human, what are you doing here? Saving your life, Marcus replied simply. Your beacon was broken. You would have died if I had not found you. Kothar tried to move and gasped in pain. He looked down at his splinted leg. You did this? You fixed my leg? It is not perfect. You need proper medical treatment, but it will hold long enough to get you out of here. The Drexian stared at him. In all their months as dorm mates, Kothar had never really looked at Marcus. He had seen a small, weak creature, not worth his attention. Now, for the first time, he truly looked. Why? He asked. Why did you help me? I have been terrible to you. I mocked you every day. I told everyone you would fail. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Because you needed help, he finally said. That is the only reason that matters. Kothar had no response to that. Morning came. Marcus helped Kothar to his feet, supporting the massive Drexian's weight on his own small shoulders. They began to walk. The extraction zone was 11 kilometers away, through frozen tundra that would have been difficult for a healthy cadet. For Marcus, carrying someone 3 times his size, it should have been impossible. He did it anyway. At the academy, instructors watched in stunned silence. The screens showed Marcus struggling through the snow, step by step, with Kothar leaning heavily on him. The human was clearly exhausted. His body was shaking. His breath came in painful gasps. But he did not stop. He should have left him, one instructor said quietly. The protocol says to continue alone. Protocol does not cover everything, Velshar replied. Her eyes never left the screen. There are some things that cannot be written in rules. Hour after hour, Marcus walked. The sun rose higher, then began to fall. His legs screamed with pain. His lungs burned. Every muscle in his body begged him to stop, to rest, to give up. He ignored them all. Kothar was barely conscious, murmuring words in his native language. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he called Marcus a fool for wasting his chance. Sometimes he was silent. As darkness fell on day 7, they reached the extraction zone. Medical teams rushed forward to take Kothar. Marcus watched them carry his dorm mate away, then collapsed to his knees in the snow. His body had nothing left to give. He had pushed himself beyond every limit he thought he had. But he had finished. He had completed the crucible. 2 days later, the completion ceremony was held in the Great Hall. Of the original 200 cadets, only 67 had finished the trial. They stood in neat rows wearing clean uniforms, waiting for their results. Marcus stood among them. His face was still marked by frostbite. His hands were bandaged. He walked with a limp that the doctors said would heal in time. But he was there. He was standing. When instructor Velshar took the stage, the hall fell silent. Cadets, she began, you have completed the most difficult test the Academy has to offer. You have proven yourselves worthy of service in the Galactic Defense Force. Each of you should be proud. She pressed a button, and a leaderboard appeared on the screen behind her. Names and rankings from first place to 67. Marcus found his name near the middle. 34th place. Not impressive by Academy standards. But Velshar was not finished. Rankings tell one story, she continued, but they do not tell the whole story. Today, I want to recognize a different kind of achievement. She turned to look directly at Marcus. Cadet Cole, please step forward. The hall was silent as Marcus walked to the front. He felt hundreds of eyes on him, from beings who had spent months laughing at his weakness. He kept his back straight and his head high. Cadet Cole, Velshar said, you did not achieve the highest score. You did not demonstrate superior strength, speed, or sensory capability. She paused. You demonstrated something we had not thought to measure. She gestured and new information appeared on the screen. Maps of Haxis 7 showing Marcus's path through all 4 biomes. Records of the storm he survived. Images of him carrying Kothar through the frozen wilderness. You were the only cadet to complete all 4 biomes. You survived conditions that should have killed you. And when you found a fallen comrade who had given you nothing but contempt, Kothar was in the audience, standing on crutches. His eyes were fixed on the floor. You carried him home, Velshar finished. The hall remained silent. Humans, the instructor continued, do not live long. They are not strong. They see poorly, heal slowly, and die easily. By galactic standards, they are one of the weakest species in the Conquered. She stepped closer to Marcus. But they adapt. They endure. They refuse to stop. And they help others, even those who do not deserve it. She raised all 4 of her arms in a formal salute, the highest honor one warrior could give another. Cadet Cole, you have made me reconsider what strength means. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, Ilix stood from her seat and raised her crystalline arms in salute. Then Kothar, struggling on his crutches, did the same. Then Cyrus, the Velthari who had laughed loudest, rose with shame in his eyes and saluted. One by one, every cadet in the hall stood. Every instructor. Even the ancient commandant, who had seen 1,000 ceremonies and remembered none of them, rose to honor a small, weak human who had refused to quit. Marcus looked at them all. The beings who had mocked him, dismissed him, predicted his failure. Now they were saluting him. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply nodded and said, "Humanity is honored to serve alongside you all." 1 month later, the Concord of 12 received a formal request from the Galactic Defense Academy. It was a request for more human cadets. The request was approved unanimously. On Earth, Marcus Cole's story spread across every nation. Children grew up hearing about the first human at the Academy, the one who had been mocked and underestimated, the one who had proven that weakness and strength were not always what they seemed. And in the quiet of his dormitory, now shared with a Drexian who called him brother, Marcus Cole looked up at the stars and smiled. Humanity had taken its first steps into the galaxy. There would be many more to come.